the last board that you ride is the one that counts too. There's some surfers, especially in Hawaii, that tend to switch shapers. See Dora right here, good looking left.
Iago tucking in, pulling through, draining barrel. Iago Dora puts on the gas and comes out. Yes, it's momentum, all Iago Dora. There's another competition that's going on, Mitchell. It's the Vissla CT Shaper Rankings, and this was a great stop for the crew over there at Lost and Mayhem. Let's take a look at stop number 3 in the standings of the Vissla CT Shaper Rankings. And Lost vaulted up to number 1, Mitchie.
Wow, more than 12,000 points separating them and Sharp by now at number 2. Channel Islands, they're still in the mix at number 3. GH had a couple of big results with Molly and Ethan Ewing. And Timmy Patterson with just a couple of surfers on tour there at number 5, gentlemen.
Pretty crazy, man. I think like it was a big event for Mayhem right there.
Huge.
Oh yeah, big happenings there. But it's a long road. We're only at stop number 3 out of 11 stops on the regular season championship tour. Lots can happen right now.
Hey, welcome back to the Lineup Podcast. I'm Dave Prodan here with Mitch Salazar. It's time to talk some surfboards. It is 3 events into the season. We're going to talk about the 2025 Vissla CT Shaper Rankings. It's now into our 3rd year. Quick reminder for lineup listeners on how this works. It is a combined men's and women's ranking. We count all surfers that finish in the quarterfinals or better. The shapers receive the same rankings point that correlate to their respective surfer finishes. The higher the surfer places, the more points that shaper receives. We track the Vissla CT Shaper Rankings from Pipeline through Tahiti. And in addition to being crowned the 2025 CT Shaper of the Year at the WSL Awards, this year's winner will be gifted an overnight stay and surf at Surf Ranch Lemoore, courtesy of the Kelly Slater Surf Ranch, as well as the WSL. So Mitch, we talked about it in the opening segment of winners and losers, but after a relatively slow start to the season, 2-time CT Shaper of the Year, Matt Biolas and the Lost Surfboard teams, they're back on top. They're back on top in a big way. What did you see on the ground just in terms of equipment? We had so many different conditions, different waves. What stood out to you in terms of what people were riding?
Yeah, especially that one day where things got big real quick. People had transitioned from a short board, which, primarily driver 3.0. You have the sub driver 2.0, which is, one of the best adaptable short boards in the business by Matt Biolas and the Mayhem team. The step driver and the Whiplash, 2 very used boards once it got a little bit bigger. I believe Iago won on that yesterday, the step driver. And it's just basically a driver that's a little bit longer. The rocker tends to be a little bit more outlined just because of that extra length. And of course, a little bit more V in the tail because of that too. These boards work at this level due to the high performance surfing that we're seeing by both the men and the women. Mm-hmm. Do want to point out though that the fins specifically, we're seeing something on the future side where majority of the men's surfers were on the John Tech Flex. One of the most important and versatile fins I'd say on the market, Dave. Mm-hmm. And of course, with a punchy, powerful beach break like the one we see here in Super Tubos, it's really the perfect fin setup. Something that really just holds the rail a little bit longer, always fits in the pocket and turns real tight in the pocket too. And that's why John had a lot of success here over the years too, redefining that fin material over the last decade or so. Just want to point out though that I know that Mayhem's still dominating right now. Chris Borst is still right there due to Caitlin Simmer's success. He only has one surfer and the guy's in the top 5. And that's why the Vissla CT Shaper Rankings are so important. Once again, those people that DM me all the time, hey, it's not fair. The teams aren't structured well. Dude, Mayhem was really smart to open up the market in South America and in Brazil, and look at what it's done for him. When they got Iago Dora and really acquired a lot of those South American surfers, both on the QS, the CS, and of course on the Championship Tour, Dave, it opened up major opportunities for them. And once we started the Vissla CT Shaper Rankings, it's obviously made a major impact. But Channel Islands, same thing. Brisa Hennessy, she wants to get things going for them. They've been out of the picture the last 2 events, really. Bella Kenworthy got some points on the board for them. But Imai DeVault, same thing. He kind of wants to get things going. He's been a pivotal and important part. I want to say congrats to Baron Mamiya. He's number 2 in the world right now, surfing for Channel Islands. Really, really contending the way both of us thought he would in the last few years. Best results outside of Hawaii so far, right here in Portugal. And I feel like he's going to be one to look out for over there in Punta Roca.
Yeah, it's a great point. I was going to bring up the tiered component to the Vissla CT Shaper Rankings. We actually had reigning women's world champion Katie Simmers post about Chris Borst being in the top 5 heading into Portugal, which I personally loved. He actually just got edged out slightly by another board builder who now has 2 surfers on his program, but primarily with the world #1 Italo Ferreira, Timmy Patterson. Yeah. Timmy Patterson's cracked into the top 5 after Paniche. It is really interesting because I think in the last 2 seasons, what we saw were kind of those 3 tiers. You had the bigger programs that had 8 to 10 surfers in and around. You had sort of the middle-sized programs that were in the 4 to 6 range. And then you had the smaller programs that had 1 to 2 surfers. That's really shifted in year 3 where it's kind of moved into 2 tiers, right? You've got programs with like 1 or 2 or programs with like 6 or more. The middle class has gotten eradicated on the Vissla CT Shaper Rankings in year 3. Yeah, Mitch, I want to talk about board experimentation across the tour, but specifically at a venue like Paniche, because I am personally a huge fan of when we see the world's best surfers use slightly different equipment, competing against one another, the lines they can draw, whether it's, Dane Reynolds on the MTFA or, Chris Ward on the round nose fish at Snapper Rocks, things like that. I'd imagine, and I want to get your take on this too, really hollow waves like your Teahopus at your pipelines. I think in the past we've seen boards get a little bit shorter. We've seen the use of quads get enabled. And then at like high performance point breaks or like a lower trestles or Snapper Rocks, you've seen people experiment a little bit with outlines, a little bit more with maybe epoxies, etc. It feels like at a wildly different from minute to minute beach break like a Super Tubos, or especially this year, surfers tend to gravitate towards what they think works. I want to get your take on this because it feels like those kind of waves, like punchy beach breaks that are unpredictable, that's where you see maybe the least amount of experimentation in terms of tech, in terms of shape, in terms of fin setup. But what's your read on that?
Yeah, well, it's an excellent point because you want the old reliable at a spot like this, just because it's so unpredictable and it changes so much. But that being said, 2-time world champ Felipe Toledo, that guy was riding a quad, his trusty quad, which was a carbon board, by the way, with an EPS center. And, you wouldn't normally ride an epoxy given the conditions that we see out here, especially with so much wind. They tend to, really feel it a lot more, first of all. But then the quad is just something that he really likes to adjust to when it comes to managing his speed and potentially gaining more speed and control within the barrel riding experience. Unfortunately for him, that board broke in that quarterfinal appearance that he had. And against Jordy Smith, actually, in the round of 16. I had never seen a board get delaminated the way it did, eventually snap, and then the lamination went all the way through the traction pad, too. It was kind of scary the way it happened. Bounced back on the backup board, though, eventually defeated Jordy when, he let a wave go at the end, and Philippe made him pay. But this is one of those locations where I just feel you need to bring options. Gabby Bryan brought about 2 to 3 different board bags with 12 or 13 boards in them. And you just got to bring a ton of boards and leave them in your locker room. And next thing you know, there is a chance for you to surf him. Caroline Marks actually won on a board that she had ridden once before the event started. Seemed like it worked great. She eventually won the competition. And then, of course, Jack Robinson to me is a great person to look out for when it comes to these kind of stuff, too, because you look at how he had to surf, and he was at the top of the draw, right, Dave? Where that one big day, it goes from literally being 2 to 3 feet to all of a sudden being 2 to 3 times overhead. Has to paddle out on a synergy that's just slightly bigger. But that's one of those guys that likes to drop in underneath the lip line. So doesn't necessarily need to be paddling into a wave to be able to catch it that way, because the way he positions himself, especially as an excellent barrel rider, the way he is, he just want to drop in under the lip. And, personally, I'd be bringing 6 to 8 boards, depending on how many I could afford and how many board bags I could potentially bring. But that's just knowing that I can turn a larger board that's 2-3 inches longer just as well as any kind of short board. And that's how Cole Houshman operates. That's how Connor O'Leary operates. Those bigger dudes can handle that kind of energy and that power with their surfing. That's not everybody, though. And some people just need a little bit, more of length, a little bit extra width, or a little bit extra thickness just to be able to get into certain waves. And everybody's different in that sense. But it is a difficult location with what you're mentioning.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And, on the topic of those smaller board programs, we talked about Timmy Patterson out of San Clemente. He's got Italo Ferreira. He's got Al Cleland. We talked about Chris Borst out of San Diego. They might be smaller programs, but they've got the 2 number ones in the world right now. They've got Italo Ferreira leading the men's side. They got Katie Simmers leading the women's side. So something to keep an eye on just on the intimacy component. I'd love to go back through history, specifically like the last 20 years, and kind of identify how common that is. You've obviously got Gabriel Medina with Johnny Cabianca. You've got both Tyler and John with John Pizell. Those aren't the big programs, but before that, you had Channel Islands, you had DHD, you had Jaya, you had all these sort of bigger programs that were producing the very top surfers in the world. But maybe in recent years, it's become more of an intimate kind of conversation with these elite level surfers and world champions and world title contenders. You mentioned that you had dinner with Kanoa Igarashi last night, and eagle-eyed listeners had been pointing out that Kanoa was on the verge of changing something up. He famously was with Channel Islands from when he was a very, very young surfer. He changed to Sharp Eye. He'd been with them for several years, produced awesome results. And he changed again in between the last time you and I spoke to now. He is with JS Surfboards. Did you guys talk about that at all?
We haven't actually had the chance to really get into it that much, but he did tell me, hey, dude, it was just a change that I felt I needed. Not that the other boards were stale.
Yeah.
I just felt like I needed to get my performances and kind of get my mojo back. Sometimes that's all that takes, and it can be a psychological thing. And of course, he knows what Jason's capable of with shaping amazing boards. Look at the people that currently ride for him and who's ridden for him in the past. We're talking about world champions, Andy, Bruce Irons, Joel Parkinson, Aki, of course, but I just think it comes down to your personal preference and how comfortable you feel on this kind of equipment, because just going back to the smaller labels, Tim Stamps only had 1 or 2 riders on tour.
Sure.
Brett Simpson, Courtney Conlog.
Yep.
Bill Johnson would take off surfboards. Also, CJ Hobgood for a good amount of time right there. And then, we always talk about Marcio and how small his program was before he really got Philippe. I remember getting a few boards off of him for a real cheap price, because a lot of Latin American guys used to ride them, and it used to be like, hey, where'd you get that board? Oh, it's a Sharp Eye. Marcio makes them. He lives in San Diego. He head over to the factory. It's a real small program. And then 2 years later, I email him to try to get some boards, and he's like, oh, yeah, this is the price now. And I was like, whoa, what happened? But, eventually you got more people you need to pay, a lot more employees. You need more distribution centers because your label's getting larger and larger. And this is the thing that stokes me out the most about the Vissla CT Shaper Rankings. Yes, we give credit to the one person on top that kind of made the label famous, but it trickles down to everybody. The Glassers, the Sanders, people that are involved in sales. Mike Riola from Catalyst and Mayhem was here, and we had lunch with him. And, he just talked about how Strider was actually a big part of that Mayhem program in the 90s and the kind of impact that Chucky Regano, all those guys made. Ryan Simmons when he was in charge of the surf team, and look at what they're at now. And I feel like that could happen for Timmy. Maybe he doesn't want that to happen. Jason definitely wanted it to happen. He opened up the label with the Pupo brothers over there in South America now. And, I'm just personally very grateful to see a lot of these people actually get the opportunity to create these boards under a certain label with their kind of infusion of cultural impact that they've seen over the years within their specific locations too. Those boards that Miggy and Sam have been riding lately from Jason Stevenson, they're being shaped by their father, Wagner. But it's a shape that Jason made himself over there in Australia. So what's the big difference? Maybe a little bit of taper here, knowing that this is what works for a little bit better for you, because I'm your father. I've been shaping for you for 30 years. Nobody knows you better than me. And those kind of small details go a long way when it comes to board building.
Yeah. I think that note on Kanoa too is such a good one, because I've heard it since well before I even worked here, which it's like, oh man, why is this elite level surfer parting ways with their shaper? And yeah, sometimes it's because things don't work out, but so often because I think that the ocean's the most dynamic field to play in all of sports. It's like you get the surfer, it's like they know their ability, they know their approach, they know their athleticism, they know their equipment, and they're just like, well, I can't really tweak any of these things. There's nothing wrong with the equipment, but maybe I just need to see something different, right?
Yeah.
I just want to feel, it's almost like there's nothing wrong. I'm just making a change for change's sake, and I just want to feel different. And you've seen it over history. And I would say that goes for, even civilian surfers too, that maybe they're on one board program forever. And it's like, it's not the boards aren't working. I want to feel something different.
The thing about history is that whatever happens, happens. There's no denying it. History doesn't ask for your approval. It's not necessarily good or right, not pretty, not fair. It is what it is. And no matter how hard you try, you're never entirely in control. It's the beautiful chaos. Hell and heaven canceling each other out. Triumph and defeat. This year, history will be told in 12 chapters. 54 men and women will write it. And once it's written, it can't be unwritten. The question is, will you witness it? History will be written live at worldsurfleague.com.